afternoon, depending on where you are. We are going to have our monthly webinar today, Driving Success. So thank you for joining us. Today we're going to talk about some regulation changes that have been going around, and whether you find these changes positive or negative, there will be an impact on how your drivers and logistics team operates, as well as the expectations that will come from your customers. So just some quick housekeeping before we get into it. We will not be having a Q&A this webinar. We just have a lot to talk about, and for time's sake, we're not going to have a Q&A, but please feel free to reach out to our team if you have any questions after our presentation. We will be recording this presentation, so if you'd like to revisit at a later time, the recording will be sent to you, as well as be posted on our YouTube and our websites. So, like I said, we have a lot to talk about, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to touch on 2 regulation changes that may possibly be in your future. One of the hot topics is a conversation about EV and increasing the green footprint of the industry. Because of this, California is pushing even harder to go completely EV by 2027. And dealers are being pushed to sell more trucks that are EV within the EV standards of zero of emissions. And consumers are being attacked with the new smog regulations to help kind of drive this change. So going green sounds great till we look at some of the side effects of it, and one being the initial price of an EV truck. Currently, a new diesel truck is around $180,000 to $200,000 is kind of what the market is at right now. With the new regulation, the price of the truck is over double that. So a Class 8 EV truck is going to be around $500,000, and a hydrogen fuel truck is around $450,000. And this can differ by make and the upgrades that you get, but we're just going off of averages here. But even going off of the average, there's a huge difference in that price. You know, we see that it's over double of what a diesel truck is today. So usually with a more expensive initial purchase price comes with the cost of increased maintenance fees as well. So we also have to look at what is going to be required for upgrades of infrastructure to be able to support this green initiative. So it's no secret that in order to efficiently operate these new assets, new infrastructure will need to be built. Some of this will be charging stations that will need to be funded and built before this deadline of 2027. And that's only 3 years from now. And that's not a lot of time to meet that deadline for how many of these additional stations are going to be needed. So California is projected to spend around $620 billion to meet this requirement of an infrastructure change. On top of that, building the physical stops, there's going to be a need for an increase of power, right? So power companies will need to invest an average of $370 billion to keep up with the additional power needs that will come from EV vehicles. So with that, as we have seen in the past with profit as a main concern, the bill will most likely be passed on to the consumer, whether that is through those who utilize the fueling stations directly, or if it will be a blanket effect across all consumers, both those just using power residentially or commercially. But it's not something that we haven't seen before with increased project costs. And then we've already talked about the double cost of what we can see for trucking companies, not only from that electric bill being passed on to them, but as well as the truck pricing, the maintenance, and the upkeep of these vehicles. Furthermore than just the price, we can add the argument to the table and ask, will there even be enough energy to support the influx of demand? California was already having problems supporting the EV vehicles on the road now, and even just the everyday usage of power. It's not new to California to experience rolling blackouts, and that's already caused some major inconveniences with just normal everyday usage. So now we're going to add these large trucks into the equation of needing power to operate, and they will require even more power due to, simply the weight of the vehicle, as well as the drivers are operating longer hours, more miles. They're just averaging farther distances, needing more refueling than the average driver on the road. So how do they propose to keep up with the power demand if there are already issues without the regulations in place? I guess these new upgrades are supposed to help with that, but we'll see how that works out in the future. So let's say that all the logistics and the timeline is met to build the infrastructure needed to make this EV push happen. How does this change the way an EV company operates and the efficiency demand that has been the precedent for years? The estimated operation miles is around 230 miles per charge for an EV vehicle. So for a driver to have to go from Sacramento to LA and back in one day, they're going to need to stop and fuel up more than if they were driving a diesel vehicle. It takes on average about 2 hours for a Class 8 truck to charge up fully. So if we do the math, right, from Sacramento to LA, it's about 380-ish miles, give or take, which route you take. And altogether 760 miles round trip. So in order to make that trip, a driver would need to stop over 3 times to charge up. And that doesn't include sitting in LA traffic, burning up additional energy. This is simply just a straight shot from Sacramento to LA, no stops, no hiccups, no traffic, no nothing. That doesn't seem very efficient in the way to operate when you have to stop almost 4 times to fill up for 2 hours at a time, or energize for 2 hours at a time. So we also can ask the question, well, what about those who are going to operate interstate? How many times will a driver need to stop to recharge their truck to make it from California to New York and back? So we can run into the issue of not only needing additional refuel time, but also how can we guarantee that these drivers will find the same infrastructure changes across the country? Other states, other than like California, haven't had the same push for an EV initiative, so the charging accessibility is going to be slim for these drivers. Overall, there are some gaps in this plan. The intentions may be good, but just poor planning and execution can really be detrimental to the industry, the efficiency, and overall, it's going to affect the customer in the long run too. You may say, I'm just gonna not operate in California if you aren't based in California. That's one possible change that you could look at. And it's an easy fix if you're not based in California. But the reality is there should really be nationwide concern with this starting in California, right? Because all it takes is one, and the chances of it spreading to multiple, if not all states, eventually is very high. So even if you're not based in California or plan to operate in California, this potentially can become your reality and end up increasing your cost of maintenance and operations for these trucks. It's also really going to affect the smaller fleets as well, and owner-operators who are already operating on a pretty small margin, which, let's be honest, nowadays, who isn't with the way that the economy is right now? And this is really terrible timing due to the economy to be pushing a change that is going to cost as much as it does. The last thing to think about as well is the deadline unreasonable? 3 years to fund and execute everything that needs to happen in order for this green initiative to happen. I mean, it seems pretty slim. That's not that much time. So that's on the push for EV by 2027. We're also going to talk about another change that California has kind of been toying with, And that includes some alterations to the regulations of hours of service, specifically involving breaks and lunches. So the current rule set right now for hours of service, and this is not including if you have, special exemptions or circumstances. It's a driver will have a cap of 14 hours of working time. That includes driving, that includes unloading, loading, just working time in general. Of those 14 hours, only 11 of those can be driving time. Within that, they must take a 30-minute meal break after 8 hours of driving. So these rules of working hours and the rest times that need to be taken have been set into place by FMCSA after considering efficiency and overall safety of drivers and others on the road. So every state follows this rule. It's set overall for unity and for efficiency. So California is toying with the idea and proposing overriding these rules of hours of service to meet their own labor laws, which include a 30-minute unpaid lunch break after working 5 hours and an additional 30-minute lunch break if worked more than 12 hours. Additionally, workers are entitled to a 10-minute rest period every 4 hours. So let's go ahead and compare these two rule sets that we have here. So instead of one 30-minute break within a driver's day, they must take two 30-minute breaks if they're operating that full, 14-hour workday, as well as if they're operating within that full 14-hour workday. They will have to take 4 10-minute breaks on top of their 2 30-minute breaks as well. So this can make operations a little tricky for companies, not only for California drivers having to reorganize their days from what has been the norm for years, but it also causes a confusion for drivers outside of the state and California drivers who travel interstate. So this poses the question that if other states follow a similar pattern with making their own rule sets, and when a driver passes through that state, they're going to have to follow those rule sets. How do they know which rule sets they need to follow? So this lack of unison will cause more harm than good. And there has been evidence specifically with totally drawing a blank right now, with the production line, that having different rule sets and having different laws regarding states and everything has really caused some logistics deficiencies and a lot of confusion, and it overall is just not very efficient way to operate on their own rule sets. And the logistics of planning when and where to take these additional breaks on a tight schedule can cause some negative effects. Some of those negative effects is the issue of adequate break spots being available for the drivers to take these breaks requirements. There already is a shortage of safe and easily accessible rest areas for truckers, and increasing the need to find a location, hopefully safe and hopefully very accessible, depending on where they are on the road. It will force more drivers to park off the side of the road because they've hit their limit where they need to take their 10-minute break. It is pretty unfair to put these drivers in in a spot where they have to make even more sacrifices than they already are, and put them in an unfair and unsafe situation more than they already have to. There also is the concern that we can predict some efficiency issues with this, right? With the cut-in hours drivers are able to operate, even though the hours have been cut down due to the needs of the breaks as well as the cap on the hours, the expectation of delivery will most likely remain the same, pushing drivers to possibly take shortcuts to meet the standard of delivery they have had for years. And we all know that when corners are cut, there's always eventually a not so good outcome, either within a safety issue, an audit issue, and maybe even sometimes, the lack of safety at the forefront of a driver's mind can cause, some really detrimental outcomes to others on the road or even the driver himself. So intentions behind the proposed regulation changes, again, they may be good, but the overall impact it has from what we've seen is, for those actually operating in the industry, we mostly kind of see a negative effect on this. It is not new for the trucking and transportation industry to be constantly fighting regulations put into place by those who don't operate in the space, and that they're trying to change a space that they don't really know anything about. There will always be pros and cons, but the history of forcing specific drivers, like AB5 a couple of years ago, right, showed some pretty big negative effects. And majority of the time, the regulations are pretty tone deaf to the current state of the industry, the economy, and the individuals affected. This is not an industry that our country can go without. So what can you do to keep from intrusive regulations disrupting your operations and complicating the job of your drivers and ultimately yourself and your logistics team? So the best thing that you can do for the industry is stay informed, stay involved, and stay heard. Keep up to date with proposed regulation changes, not just federally, but also within other states as well, because like we mentioned, it only takes one state to really make a push for changes in other states and make it a federal law. Keep in touch with your state and federal officials and let them know how these proposed changes can affect you and the industry as well. So the VLC and the DQM team are doing our part with contacting our state senators to voice that with being in the business for over 20 years, we have seen some outcomes of a lot of changes that have happened that are meant to be good, ultimately meant to help, but they really turn sour and have a negative effect on the industry and our clients. So I want to thank you guys for joining for our monthly webinar, Driving Success. Unfortunately, due to time, we will not be having a Q&A for this session, as I mentioned in the beginning. However, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our team. We'll be more than happy to kind of discuss any regulations or any concerns that you may have. And then be on the lookout for our invite for next month. We will be having a guest speaker from Luma Learning, an award-winning learning platform that offers custom workplace training. We'll be sending that link out for sign up, and it's going to be a really great webinar, so we're looking forward to it. Thank you again so much for joining us, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day.